My name's Rebecca Kaplan, and I've been an IBD caregiver for the past 12 years. I don't think anybody ever imagines becoming a caregiver when you're young, but it happened for me when I was 20 years old. My now husband was diagnosed with Crohn's disease just 2 months after we started dating, and I didn't know anybody who had Crohn's. I didn't know what it meant to have a chronic illness, and honestly, I didn't even realize how serious the disease would be. I knew that he went to the bathroom a lot and he was underweight and malnourished, but I figured he could just take some medicine and that would be that. My true caregiver story didn't start until right after we were married. We moved about 3 hours away from our families to a new state where I had accepted a job, and we decided to transition his care. He hadn't been told by previous doctors that he needed to be seen regularly, so it'd been about 3 years since he'd had a colonoscopy, and in that time, he was taking 9 pills a day. He was still going to the bathroom 25 to 30 times a day. He was extremely underweight, malnourished, fatigued to the point where he couldn't get out of bed, and just all around in bad shape. So we scheduled a colonoscopy with his new doctor, and when she went in, we discovered that he had a stricture. So a stricture is a narrowing in the intestines, and they say that your intestinal passageway should be about the width of your pinky. His was about a quarter the size of your pinky. So when she went to push the scope through, she ended up perforating or nicking the intestinal wall. When he was in the recovery room, he woke up, and about 45 minutes later, as we were trying to be discharged, he spiked 104 fever and said to me and the nurses that he thought he was dying. And I don't know that I've ever been more scared in my life than I was in that moment. But at the same time, I kind of jumped into mama bear mode, where I was going to do anything and everything I needed to do to make sure we figured out what was wrong and what we needed to do to make it right. So what ultimately ended up happening is, because of the perforation, E. coli got into his bloodstream and he had an infection. So we were in the hospital for 5 days, and during that time, I skipped work so I could be with him. I was driving an hour back and forth periodically throughout the day to go check on our 5-month-old puppy, because as we had no support network, we had nobody who could take care of him. And just all around trying to figure out the best way that I could support him while not truly understanding what exactly his disease was or what would happen in the future with it. So obviously, he was very sick at the time, and that was just the start of a 2-year period where he was incredibly sick. Taking care of your mental and emotional health as a caregiver is extremely important, because I know that if I'm overly stressed or anxious, I'm not going to be able to take care of my husband to the best of my ability. So I like to do things like reading, hanging out with my friends, seeing my family, doing silly things with my dog to make sure I'm disconnecting from the caregiver side of my life and engaging in the other part of my life, because I like to think of myself as a wife, a daughter, a friend, a sister, as well as a caregiver. And when I pay attention to both sides and make sure that I'm taking time for myself and disconnecting from the caregiving piece for a little while, I come back refreshed, I'm relaxed, I'm less stressed, and I'm better equipped to handle the different things that are thrown at me, because when you're a caregiver, you never know what to expect or when to expect something to happen, so you kind of always need to be on your game. So making sure that you're taking time for yourself and doing things that are fun really help me in maintaining my mental and emotional health and my ability to truly be an advocate for my husband. So, like anybody with Crohn's disease, you have really good times and periods of really bad times. And when I want to think about bad times, most recently was when my husband was in the hospital in the emergency room last year. We were driving home from a wedding in DC, and throughout the trip, he started feeling more and more nauseous, needing to go to the bathroom, and just not feeling all around well. And he had dealt with something similar in August last year as well, and we still don't know what it was, but we ended up in the ER, and he was getting saline. Still wasn't feeling great. They were giving him anti-nausea meds, all of that. But we were waiting for them to give him more saline. Now, this was a hospital that we hadn't been in before. They obviously weren't very familiar with Crohn's disease, but we know that if he's dehydrated, it's going to take at least 4 bags of saline for him to feel rehydrated again. But the doctor on call only put in an order for 2. So we went through the 2 bags relatively quickly over a few hours, and he was just sitting there, continuing to feel progressively worse. And at this point, it had to have been 8 or 9 o'clock at night. We had been there for 6 hours already. Nobody was checking on him. So I had to start stalking the doctor's desk and the nurse's desk and asking to see the doctor and say, he has Crohn's disease. He's been vomiting and having diarrhea for hours. He's still not feeling well, and he's naturally dehydrated because of his disease. You need to give him more saline. And he ended up having to stay overnight to be observed because he wasn't feeling well. But of course, once they gave him another bag and a half of saline, it was like 2 in the morning, and he finally felt like he was better and could handle leaving the hospital at that point. But nobody ever gets discharged that late at night when they've been kept for observation, so he ended up being in the hospital until almost noon the next day, solely because nobody was paying attention or listening to what he needed, until I literally had to go to the desk and start harassing the doctors who were there. So that's just an example of a day in the life of a caregiver. If I see something that's not happening, I'm not afraid to go and try and make sure that he's getting the best care possible. So whether that's going with him to doctor's appointments and asking the questions he may not want to ask, like when is he due for a colonoscopy, or dealing with people in the ER who are not familiar with his disease, all of that kind of comes with being a caregiver, and it's hard and it sucks at times, but I love him and I wouldn't have it any other way at this point. So when we first moved to the state we were living in at the time when he got very sick, I didn't really know how to cope. So I did what I do with a lot of things, and I went to Dr. Google, and I tried to find other caregivers in my position. But what I discovered was all the information online for caregivers was either for parents of kids who were sick, it was for people caring for older adults, or it was for people caring for cancer patients. There was very little in general about caregiving, and there was even less about caregiving as a young adult. And so I started to blog. I started to write out what I was feeling and what I was experiencing, and hoping that my personal take on it would help inspire and empower others and feel supported and connected in their own personal journey. And through my blog, I met a ton of other patients and other caregivers in similar positions. And weirdly enough, at this point, I probably have more friends now who have Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis than who don't. And that's all because of the work that I've done online. Another way that I found support was through the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation. So in 2010, I signed my whole family up for Take Steps, and we did a walk up near Hartford, Connecticut. So for this walk, my parents came, my husband's parents came, all of his siblings came, our niece, our aunt and uncle, our cousins, and my husband went to a bachelor party. And I think that's pretty typical of the early stages of him coping with his disease. He didn't really want to be around other people. He didn't want to talk about it, but I had this yearning and need to feel the community and feel the support and feel connected to really understand what he was going through so that I could best help him. And we found that through Take Steps. And so over the years, he finally came around and started coming to the walks with me. And we did 3 years of Take Steps. And then we transitioned to Team Challenge because I had this crazy idea that if he could have part of his intestines removed, I could handle running a half marathon. Now I learned that I can't run, period, but I attempted walking the half marathon, and he joined me for it, even though he didn't train, and he finished that first one and I didn't. And then he went on to run 2 more half marathons with Team Challenge, and I still fundraise today. I've done multiple Take Steps walks since then. I've been a Spin for Crohn's and Colitis Cures participant, and I'm lucky enough that I'm now a full-time employee for the foundation, and I get to take my personal experience as a caregiver and provide my support and my experience and help support other patients and caregivers going through similar situations. So, if I could offer any final words of encouragement to other caregivers or patients who are living with Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis, it would be to don't be afraid to be an advocate. Ask questions. I tend to err on the side of asking more questions, and I'm lucky that we have a very good relationship with my husband's gastroenterologist where she humors me and all of my crazy questions. But really learning as much as you can and really getting grasp on not only what the diseases are, but what the treatments are and what the long-term effects and different things you'll deal with throughout the course of the disease are, and you'll feel better prepared for the unknowns that pop up out of nowhere. And another thing is to look for support. I can't stress enough the importance of having people around you who understand what you're going through, who are going to be there during the good times and the bad times, and finding those people so that you have your own support system to help you cope with the stress and the anxiety that comes with being a caregiver. It's not bad to be anxious or stressed, but you just want to make sure that you take that and you harness it into a motivation and power to help your loved one get through what they're dealing with. And lastly, don't be afraid to reach out to the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation. They have a wealth of resources and support for you, for your loved one, for your family members, for your friends, and really help you find your own community to get through this together and to come out stronger and even more motivated and ready to help your loved one when the next thing hits.